Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Berachot, and we are on Daf Samech, Amud Aleph, 60a. 4 lines from where the wide lines start, and we're going to discuss Haita Ishto Meuberit. That the Mishnah told us if there's certain things that are considered et tfilat shav, a worthless tefillah. Now, is there such a thing as worthless tefillah? This is something that is going to become very complicated and extremely interesting, because we had a Gemara in Masechet Berachot, our own Masechta. A few, the Gemara said that when Yeshaya Hanavi was tasked by Hashem to deliver a message to Chizkiyahu HaMelech, even though that Chizkiyahu was a tremendous tzaddik, he was extremely righteous, and he inherited a community of Ovdei Avodah Zarah. His father was not the king that he was supposed to be, and he inherited a country of Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and he turned the tide to the degree that the Gemara says, Shalchu midan vad Be'er Sheva, they sent checking from one end of Eretz Yisrael to the other end. They didn't find a child, a girl or a boy, little kids, who did not know not well versed in all of the most complicated halachot of the Torah, of Negaim and all. Tremendous. He made a community of Talmidei Chachamim, but Lamasa he didn't get married. He had a cheshbon not to get married deliberately, because Beruach HaKodesh, he had seen that he is not going to have Bani Mali, good children, and therefore he didn't want to get married. So Hashem said, Yeshaya Navi, he tells, he was sick. He didn't want to go to him. He didn't want to go to him. Hashem made it that he got deadly ill. So now Yeshaya Navi went to visit the sick and delivered the message. And it wasn't a pleasant message. He says to him, write your will, because you're not getting up from this. You're going to die, you're not going to even have olam haba. Pretty sharp. And he tells him why. He says, because you didn't get married. He says, you know why you didn't get married? Because I know I'm not going to have good kids. And tells him the ultimate answer. He says, that's not your cheshbon. You do what you do best, and you leave the rest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo alecha hamelacha ligmor, as we say. Right? You don't have to finish up the job, you have to do it. And he says, okay, so let me fix this. Let me get married. He says, no, too late. The Gezerah has been already decreed. There's no returning. There's no reversing the Gezerah. So this is the whole reason I'm bringing this, is because of the answer. He says, no, that's not how it works. I have a Mesorah, I have a tradition from my great-great-grandfather, David HaMelech, even if you have a sharp sword laying on your neck, you don't stop asking for tefillah. So that sounds pretty much like you never stop, right? Now, we're going to be introduced now to a concept that, no, sometimes you do stop. Sometimes it's not going to work. It's called tefilat shav. It's called a worthless tefillah. So the example the Mishnah gave, it says, if your wife is pregnant and you're standing there, Hashem, this should be a boy, right? It's tefilat shav. If it's a boy, it's a boy. If it's a girl, it's a girl. That's the Mishnah that we had. Now the Gemara is going to challenge that. Says the Gemara. And we'll try. This Gemara is difficult to explain some parts of it. We try our best to explain it based on our limited understanding of science and Torah. We mentioned this before once, that this has been a greater scale, has been a machloket between the medieval authorities, how to deal with, for instance, the medicine or the science information presented in the Gemara. The Rambam was of the opinion that not everything that the Gemara says is halacha Moshe Misinai. Sometimes the Gemara says this is a tradition. We have it from Adam HaRishon, right? We have this tradition from years. So that's already the Gemara is telling you. But normal, like, this is, you have this sickness, you eat this, you'll feel better. Well, where is that? That's coming from Moshe Sinai, or is that coming using also the available science in the time of Chazal? So Rambam is of the opinion that they did. Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam, his son, also is of the, but the majority of the Rishonim disagree with that. The Rivash, one of the sharpest ones that actually calls Rambam on this, and he says he was influenced by the philosophers of his time, and he reprehends and very strongly opposes that view. So that is something that's there in the backdrop of every time that we deal with this. But again, as we will mention, some parts of this are surprising that 2,000 years ago, you'll see that they knew things that it was not common knowledge. So Ishto Meuberet, if you have your wife pregnant, Ve'amar, and he's davening to Hashem, Yiratzon Shteled Zachar, that it should be a Zachar. This is Harezu Tefilat Shat. Mishnah told us that this is a worthless tefillah. Mara says, Velo Mahani Rachami. The tefillah doesn't work when once she's pregnant, really? Mativ Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asked a strong question. Ve'achar Yalda Bat. We learn about Le'ai Menu, that she had 6 boys. Bilha had 2 boys. Zilpa had 2 boys, right? And then Leah was pregnant. And when she's pregnant, says Ve'achar, after the 6 boys, Achar Yalda Bat, she gave birth to a girl. Vatikra et Shema Dina. And she called her name Dina. What does it mean, Ve'achar, and afterwards? Just say, she gave birth. You never say Ve'achar. Amarav, Ve'achar shedana le'adin ba'atzma. So Rav says, the pasuk of Ve'achar and Vatikra Shema Dina, both those languages are coming to teach you a story behind this. Why was her name Dina? Because she was dan et atzma. She made a judgment to herself. Leah, her sensitivity was evoked, and she basically says like this. She said, wait a second. I have 6 kids, boys. Bilha has 2 boys. Zilpa has 2 boys. That's how many? 10. I'm pregnant, and I know that Yaakov Avinu is going to have 12 Shvatim. Rashi brings this in the very beginning, that they knew that there's going to be 12 Shvatim. If you take a look at when Yehuda is born and says, Hapa'am odet Hashem, Leah said, this time I'm going to thank Hashem. Take a look at Rashi there. It says, why Hapa'am odet Hashem? This time I'm going to thank Hashem. It says, because all the Imahot, they knew that Yaakov Avinu is going to be Ma'amid Yud Bet Shvatim. He's going to have 12 Shvatim. So if you do the basic math, every one of the Imahot should get 3. So once she had the 4th one, said, oh, I got extra, right? I didn't deserve this. By the way, that explains why the Gemara says, until Leah came and said, Hapa'am odet Hashem, nobody thanked Hashem. Nobody thanked Hashem. How about Adam Arishon? Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat was authored by Adam Arishon, even though that it's in the Tehillim. Tehillim, as we mentioned before, there are 10 authors, and the Gemara in Baba Batra discusses this, right? So it says, Tov lo dod Hashem. It's thanking Hashem. So let me know no one that thanked Hashem. People brought korbanot. It says, no, because the core element of thinking is to realize that you didn't deserve it. That's a real thing. So here was a real thing. He said, I really didn't deserve this, and he gave it to me. I didn't deserve a 4th one. I got 3 based on cheshbon, right? So you see that they had this. This is a whole machloket, because the Gemara, when he counts the 7 neviot, 7 women who were considered prophets, the name of Leah is not there. Leah was not one of the prophets. a woman, right? So how does she know? So there's those who say that this was an element of nebuah, or that they had this tradition. They knew, however, they knew that it's going to be 12 shvatim. So she made a judgment. So wait a second. If this one is a boy too, there will be 11 boys not from Rachel, which would mean that Rachel maximum would get how many boys? One, which is less than one of the maidservants. Shvachot, one of the concubines of Yaakov, right? We spoke about this before, how the image of every one of the wives of Yaakov were, but the simple is that Leah looked at herself and Rachel as the main wives, and the other two were not the main wives. So he says, oh, she's going to be, the main woman that he wanted to marry is going to be less than, it's not fair. So she davened that it's not going to be a boy. Like that's the din that she made. And the Gemara is basically implying that it was actually a boy and it was changed. Says the Gemara, take a look. She said, Yud bet Shvatim atidin latzed miYaakov. I know that they're going to be Yud bet Shvatim. Shisha yatzu mimeni. I already had 6 of them. And 4 of them already have been born from the Shvachot. Hare asara. That's already 10. If this pregnancy I'm carrying is going to also be a zachar, Lot achoti Rachel, the main wife of Yaakov, is not going to even be as good as one of the shvachot. Not fair. Miyad, so she davened. Miyad nefcha lebat. And Mara said the pregnancy that was a boy turned into a girl. So in other words, what the Gemara is suggesting is that Yosef was Dinah, Dinah was Yosef, and it was changed. Well, it was supposed to be. By the way, this explains also why you find personalities and attributes in each one of them suggesting the other gender. Dinah was the one that was horseback riding. She was a yatzanit, the Gemara says, the Pasuk says, Dinah, she's going to see the girls. She was a tomboyish personality, as we would call it. She was a very masculine girl. And on the other hand, and that's why, by the way, why Chazal say that she could have changed Esav. She had a very strong personality, and just like Yosef was Sitno Shel Esav, Yosef was the opposing element to Esav. You see, when Yosef is born, that's the moment that Yaakov Avinu says, "Oh, shalecheni na velcha." Right after Yosef is born, he goes to Lavan and says, "Okay, now I could go face Esav because I have Yosef already." Right? And the pasuk says, "Vatehi bet Yaakov le'esh, ubet Yosef le'lehava, ubet Esav lekash." Yosef was the lahab, was the flame of the fire of Yaakov, who could burn through Esav. So you see that Dinah also was like that. The Yaakov Avinu was held accountable. Why? He hid away Dinah from Esav, because Chazal understand, out of everyone in the world, the one person that had a shot at changing Esav was Dinah. I say now everything falls into place. You understand? And Yosef, on the other hand, he was the one that was beautiful and had long hair, and he actually took care of his hair, combing it and looking in the mirror and so on. That's what Chazal tell us, right? Yosef was a very feminine, so to speak, personality in that sense. So when you put that all together with this picture of the Gemara here, he makes it. Says the Gemara, Shenemar. Right? Mm-hmm. That's correct. Mm-hmm. Shenemar vatikra et shema Dinah. So says the Gemara's answer is en maskirin ma'aseh nisim. You cannot bring a raya from a nes. Says that was a nes. You don't bring a raya from a nes. You can't rely on a miracle. That was a miracle. Normally, that's not what happens every day, that the pregnancies switch places. So therefore, don't bring that story of Dinah and Yosef into the discussion, the halachic discussion of our sugya. Or I could answer you, forget about Maaseh Nisim, I have a better answer. It could be that she was pregnant, but she was not already a developed pregnancy. Because we have a Braita. First 3 days of pregnancy, you should ask for rahamim that the pregnancy should actually happen before the zera is spoiled, which is tremendous. The Gemara here and elsewhere more clearly, the Gemara says that inside the vaginal canal and uterus, the zera could live up to 3 days, which now we know that that's exactly true. The doctors in the crowd could speak up if it's not, but I've done the research. Well, you don't know. Okay, no, it is true. So up to 3 days, it could live inside the body. Outside is much less, and that we're talking about X chromosomes. The Y chromosomes are much faster, but they're much weaker in that sense. They die much earlier, which is going to become very relevant. It's just another line in the Gemara. So therefore, the Gemara says you should daven that the pregnancy should happen successfully before it's matzriach, right? Then, says the Gemara, the development of the Evarei Hazera, so to speak, of whether or not it's going to be Evarei Zachar or Evarei Nekeva, that's by 40th day, which is also true, without getting into the details of what this Gemara could mean or does mean. But physically, the manifestation of the Evarei Zachar and Nekeva taking place in their respective places does happen at the 40th day of pregnancy. From there, from there until Shlosha Chodashim, you should daven that there should not be any other growth that would cause the destruction of the fetus taking place in the placenta, placing itself in the uterus. And afterwards, from Shlosha Chodashim at Shisha, Yevakesh Rachamim Shlo Yeh Nefel, that should not miscarry. That's the time frame that is more thing. After 6 months already, the miscarriage is not necessarily a great chance. And says the Gemara, Mishisha Vatisha, from 6 months until 9 months, Yevakesh Rachamim Sheyetze Beshalom. They should daven that the pregnancy should be without any complications, and the delivery should be fine as well. So says the Gemara, wait a second. Umi mehani rachami. Tefillah works for that. V'ham Rabbi Yitzchak bred Rav Ami. Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rav Ami, said, Ish mazriat tchila, yoledet nekeva. Isha mazrat tchila, yoledet zachar. Normally speaking, the gender of the child is determined right at the moment of tashmish, or immediately after. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Isha ki tazriya, when the woman is mazrat, v'yalda zachar, she will give birth to a boy. Now this, the way I understand this scientifically would be, as I mentioned, when you have X and Y chromosomes, the X ones are much more resilient, but they're much slower. They're larger, slower, and the Y chromosomes are much smaller, faster, but they're much more fragile. So if she is mazrat tchila, if the egg is already there, the ones who get to the fallopian tube to where it's supposed to be, the fertilization of the egg happening, is certainly going to be the Y chromosomes. So therefore, if she's mazrat tchila, v'yalda zachar, it will be a boy, right? Because it gets there first. But if she's not, if it's not ready, the ones who stay there, if it's afterwards, the ones who stay there alive for a longer time is going to be all the X chromosomes. So it will definitely become an XX, it will become a girl. So that's the way I roughly understand this chazal, which is a tremendous thing that anyone would know this 2,000 plus years ago. based on the psukim. So says the Gemara, if that's the correct way, so then it's set already, and if it's set, you cannot change it. So what's the tefillah going to do exactly over here? So says the Gemara, it could be a scenario in which the Hazra happens in such way that both chromosomes are basically there when the Hazra of the woman happens, and then it could be this, it could be that. It's not going to be set, so therefore the tefillah would work in that scenario. If the Mishnah,
we wouldn't know.
Hence the tefillah. Says the Gemara, Haya Baba Derech. We learned in the Mishnah that if you are traveling, then you daven for your safety, right? Or sorry, that's the next part. This is a reference to when you coming into town and you hear yelling and screaming and cries. If you say, well, I daven that this should not be coming from my house. That's tefillah shav. That's worthless tefillah, because if it is, it is. If it's not, it's not. What are you davening for? Something that already has happened. So says the Gemara, in relation to that, the Gemara is not discussing necessarily the parameters of this Mishnah, but is telling us a story about the personality of Hillel, Maaseh beHillel HaZaken, Shaya ba baderech, that he was coming into town, the Shama kol tzvacha ba'ir, he hears howling and crying and yelling in coming from the town. Amar, and he said, Muftach ani she'en ze betoch beti. I am muftach, I have bitachon that this is not from my house. He's not davening yehi ratzon that it should not be from my house. He says, I have bitachon that's not from my house. Now there are many different ways of explaining this Gemara, whether it means that the Hillel is saying, especially now, thinking about the personality of Hillel, how calm he was, how composed he was. He says, my household will never react like this, even to a tragedy, right? So I know that this is not from my house, because that's not how they would have dealt with something negative. Or does it mean that we're talking about a bitachon on changing the reality of the world? That becomes a very large machloket. What exactly does bitachon mean? So the Chazon Ish wrote a sefer, a very small sefer called Emunah Bitachon, in which Chazon Ish understands and explains the concept of bitachon to be not that I have bitachon that a bag of money is going to drop from the ceiling right now, and then it's going to happen if I have real bitachon. Changing the marechot hateva, the laws of nature, but what it means is a practical emunah is called bitachon. In other words, emunah means I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and he knows what he's doing. But bitachon means putting that into action, that when things happen in life, you're boteach b'Hashem, you rely on Hashem, knowing that he knows what he's doing, and that everything that happens is for ultimate good. And that's bitachon. Going through life with reliance on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is bitachon. Does not mean that I'm going to have bitachon, or my bitachon is going to change the teva, right? And on the other hand, you have those who say this in the name of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, and Rabbi Salanter and others, that if you have bitachon that I'm going to get a gold watch, and if you really have bitachon to that, you got to get a gold watch, right? Which means the teva would have changed by the means of my bitachon. So this is a very wide and deep concept and a big machloket, which obviously we're not going to get into, but this story, the way you understand the Gemara, will also tie into that machloket, which is, again, time allowing, at some point we should have a talk just designated specifically to explain and to study this topic together. So says the Gemara. No, because it happened already. What are you praying for? Well, the reality happened if it happened. So that certainly is a tefillat shav.
Well, doesn't that go back to when the man and woman are together, and how do we know that the seed is produced or whatever simultaneously, as opposed to it being a boy or girl from the beginning? It happened already, we could say.
Yeah.
So why would tefillah be permitted over there?
Why wouldn't it be permitted? Because you don't know, you could daven. No, because you don't know, you could daven. The Gemara is just answering the other brayta, the other learning that we had, that Isha Mazrat, Yoledet Ben, so it should be said. And the Gemara's answer essentially is yes, that's correct. But because there is a scenario in which it could be open for this or that, you could still daven. But immediately afterwards, still, right? So whatever the time frame of that is, if it's a day and whatever the time frame of that is, after that point, it would be tefillat shav. Right?
What about davening for Parnasa after the time?
Okay, so that's a good question. Again, this is a very vast concept. What Rabbi Yehuda is referring to, the Gemara says in Masechet Betzad Aftet Zayin Amud Aleph, the first slide. Gemara, similar, identical Gemara also is in Masechet Batra Daf Yud. Gemara says the mezorotav shel adam ktuvot lo mirosh Hashanah v'ad Yom HaKippurim. The mezorot, the parnasa of a person is set from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. It's set aside from, the Gemara says, aside from the hotzaot of Shabbat, certain things, if you push yourself, Hashem pushes your parnasa, which is the tuition of Jewish schools, if they're actually with the rabbi's blessing that it is actually called a Jewish school, not just by name, but it's actually a Jewish school, and it's for Torah that you're pushing yourself, and for Shabbat, Yamim Tovim, so on and so forth. There's certain exceptions to the rule, but Gemara says it is said, right? And Gemara there in Baba Batra adds that not only that is said, also Chesronotav, what you're going to lose, also is said, right? But then you have another Chazal that we had this in Tanit by Harina ben Dosa, that he was such an ani. And Hashem said, "Why? In order for me to change your thing, I have to change from the day the world was created. I have to destroy everything and rebuild it. Maybe your mazal is going to be different, right?" This whole topic of mazal. So what is that? Where does that fit? If Rosh Hashanah they decide, and that's one. And then you have another Gemara in the beginning of Masechet Sotah Daf Bet that says when the formation of the child is happening, they take this tipa, the malach habemuneh al herayon takes this tipa and goes in front of Hashem, says, Tipazu mateh alea. This child who's going to be formed now, mateh alea. What's going to happen to it? Is it going to be tall or short? Is it going to be white or dark? Is it going to be handsome or ugly? Is it going to be rich or poor? Right? All of those things are predetermined, so to speak. Aval tzaddik or rasha lo amar, but it doesn't say tzaddik or rasha. That's in your own hand. Hakol b'dei shamayim, chutz mirat shamayim. That's the Gemara said. So, well, it was decreed that's going to be Ashir or Ani. So, what is the Rosh Hashanah doing over here? So, this is a very difficult question to answer in details, but in general, it's not so difficult because you have categories. And then you have details. So you could have a person that is, his mazal is to be an ashir. Now he could ruin it, or he could take advantage of it. And even within taking advantage, he could be here, he could be here. And the ani also could be here, it could be here. So there are categories and then there are details. And even those, it could be that on Rosh Hashanah it is that if you really work hard and you take advice from the people that you should take advice from, and you put the hours in and you really work hard, and then you're going to be succeeding. It's not just that in Rosh Hashanah they're going to say the bags of money are going to fall from the ceiling. That also is not. So this is a much wider and deeper concept, but all of those three areas of Shas really have to tie together in order to have that complete picture. So that's
it's like filling potential. You have a potential level, and then you can get there, or you can not.
As a suggestion, but there's more there. So says the Gemara.
Man,
Yeah, that I've heard. That I've heard. That's a good one.
Says the Gemara,
like that to be.
Amar Rava. So why is this Hillel that said that Muftach Ali? I am sure that's not coming from my house. Alava Katuv Omer. On someone like Hillel, the pasuk says, Mishmu'ara lo yira. From bad news, he's not afraid. Nachon libo. His heart is proper. Batuach b'Hashem. Reliance on Hashem. Amar Rava said this pasuk you could read it both ways. You could read it from beginning to end, or you could read it from end to beginning. How so? However you slice this pasuk, it's correct. It could be darshin from Reshe Lesete, from beginning to its end, or Miresh, or Misafele Lereshe Midrish. Could also be darshin from the end of it to the beginning of it. How so? Miresh Lesete, from reading it in order, would be Mishmu'ara aloira. He's not afraid, this person, from bad news. Why? Mata'am? Because Nachon libo batuach b'Hashem. Because he is boteach b'Hashem. And you could read it backwards as well, that a person that's nachon libo batuach b'Hashem, a person that has attained that level of bitachon and connection with Hashem, mishmu'ara alo yira, he won't be afraid of anything in the world. Says the Gemara, Hahu talmida dehava ka'azin batreh Rabbi Ishmael. It was this talmid that was walking behind Rabbi Ishmael Rabbi Yossi, Beshuka, in the marketplace. So Rabbi Ishmael sees that this guy is trembling. He's very afraid. He's fearful. Amaleh, so he tells him, says, Chatad, you are a sinner. You are a sinner. Why? Because the pasuk says, you know who is afraid? The sinners. You are a choteh. If you were in the choteh, you would not be afraid. So the Talmud, of course, was not an Amharitz. He told him, wait a second. Amaleh, the Hakativ, I am sourced after a pasuk. The pasuk says, Ashrei Adam if hetamid. Right? Fortunate is a person that is always concerned, is always afraid. The Shlomo Melech says in Mishkei. Gemara says, Amar le Rabbi Ishmael answers this Talmud. It says, no. That is speaking about Divrei Torah. A person that's concerned says, I didn't set up a chavruta to do chazara on my Amud Yomi. I may forget this. And if you forget it, you're hayav, whatever the Gemara says, you're hayav. I'm not going to say it, right? And he's afraid. That is Ashrei Adam mefahed tamid. Fortunate is the person that's always concerned, and because of his concern, he makes sure to do hazara. He makes sure to set up a review system and so on and so forth to retain his Torah. That's what he's talking about. But you're afraid of what? Any fear outside that is a bad sign. Because if you live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you're boteach b'Hashem, you're not fearful, unless you're a sinner, right? The Gemara in Sotah says, when they would send people out to the army, right before they waged war, they would go and give a whole drasha. Said, Mi ha'ish, who is a man that has betrothed a woman and has not yet married her, right, to live together, go home, you're patur from the war. And who is a person you planted a vineyard and you have not yet used it, go back home. Bana bayit hadash, who is a person that has built a new house, and you haven't started living in it, go back home, right? And then it says, me, who is a person that's afraid, go back home. The Gemara says, the whole point of those three previous things is to say this last one. And what's yareh? What are you afraid of? You're afraid of his sins, right? If you sin, and the Shulchan Aruch actually paskins this. The Shulchan Aruch says, what's the level of sin that it would be? It says, if you speak between Ishtabach to Yotzer, right? This is something people don't know. It says you're not supposed to speak when you start tefillah until the end of tefillah. So someone that speaks even between ishtabach and yotzer, that is enough sin. That's choser alav meorchei milchama, that you will come back from waging a war, right? Because sin, we had this Gemara by again, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who heard that there was an arod, right? That would kill people. He went and he put his foot into the hole, and the arod bit him, and the arod died, right? And he brought the dead arod to the Bet Midrash. Says, "Re'u banai, see she'en ha'arod memit ela hachet memit." Right? The arod doesn't kill. That's a vessel. That's a tool. Really, the chet is what kills. And I was not afraid of chet. Look at what happened to it. And the Gemara says, woe is to the person that encounters an arod, and woe is to the arod that encounters Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. Right? So that's the concept of sin. The Gemara says all of the other things of someone that betrothed a woman and built a house and planted the vineyard is because we don't want those who sin to be embarrassed to get up and leave. We say, okay, now you get up, nobody knows if it's a vineyard, if it's a house, if it's a wife. So people leave in order not to be killed. So therefore it says, Pahadu b'tzion chataim. Let's just finish this part. Amaleh v'haketiv ashrei adam mefachet. Tamid ha'u b'divrei Torah ketiv. And Bezrat Hashem, we will continue this in the days to come.
Yaakov was afraid we need Esau. Right.
Shema Yigrom Ahet.
Right. So, but